1, 2, 3, 4.
1, 2, 3, 4 middle-aged German men in what look like smart engineers' overalls stand on stage in front of consoles. Their movements are minimal as they touch keys to produce electronic music overlaid with everyday sounds, vocals and images projected onto giant screens. All a bit obscure, you might be thinking, an acquired musical taste. But Kraftwerk have just had a week as the hottest ticket in New York. They've been big influences on music ranging from the New Romantics to techno and hip-hop.
It was crazy music. I mean, it's surreal, sort of atmospheric music. Guys would breakdance to it, and I went, wow, that beats slamming. And those German guys were funky.
Their leading figure, now in his mid-60s, is Ralf, who's just announced Kraftwerk's first new album for nearly a decade. But Hütter, the only constant member of the group since it was founded in 1970, won't be rushed. This reclusive, cycling-obsessed perfectionist, based in Düsseldorf, once told the BBC that he works 168-hour weeks on his music and projects.
There's no separation between work and free time, so it's a continuous process of making music, of finding ideas, of staying in shape, of traveling, of being home, of regeneration and of activities and sleep.
So, even sleep's part of the creative process. Hütter likes to work immersed for months in a studio cut off from the outside world. Philipp Holstein, culture editor of the local Rheinische Post newspaper, searches in vain for his local music star.
You never see Ralf Hütter, but we know his headquarters, the Klingklang studio at the Mintropstraße near the main station. It's built in a backyard of a big yellow building, but there is no sign, and if you know nothing about the studio, you will not find it. Sometimes there's an old Mercedes car parked in front of the building, and this is the only sign of Kraftwerk in this city.
The mystique surrounding Hütter is intense. So what can we know of his background and extraordinary influence? He was a child of post-war Germany, a Germany economically resurgent in the Rhineland where he grew up, but hugely lacking in cultural self-confidence after the Nazi catastrophe.
He was born in 1946 in Krefeld, and his father was a doctor. He was part of the wealthy middle class, and I think Ralf Hütter studied architecture in Remscheid, not so far away, and he came back to found several bands. At first they played beat music, songs by the Rolling Stones and The Who and stuff like that.
He'd first performed as a schoolboy in the 1960s, playing the music the Brits and Americans occupying West Germany had brought with them, joining a band with Ulrich Pudelko.
When we played House of the Rising Sun from the Animals, he made a solo for 10 minutes in his own style.
What kind of style was that when he played for 10 minutes?
Improvisation. He liked to improvisate. You know what I mean.
He was improvising,
yes.
Experimenting all the time.
Yeah. He did it on keyboard, and we waited till he finished, and we went on with a normal song, yeah.
10-minute improvisations, original for some, monotonous for others, were an early hint of Hütter's refusal to mimic the mainstream. His groups moved on to experiments with flutes and violins as well as guitars, and increasing use of electronic sound. Hütter's always been fascinated by the way everyday sounds, the hum of economic miracle Germany all around him, created its own music and rhythms. A band called Kraftwerk, the German word means power station, was born in 1970. In a studio in Düsseldorf, amidst the washing machine makers and insurance companies, they created a kind of factory for experimental music, as Hütter later recalled.
And I had a simple electronic organ, and we worked a lot with echo chambers, tape machines, very simplistic elements in those days, because you can imagine there wasn't that much in the budget. So we produced very minimal records, and well, it has developed from there.
The Kraftwerk style developed into what Hütter called industrial folk music, reflecting, he said, what Germany now sounded like. Vorsprung durch Musik might have been the motto. Travel and movement was a particular fascination. Railways in the album Trans-Europe Express, or the relentless rhythm of the Autobahn. Popularity and fame in Germany was slow in coming. But from abroad, there was growing curiosity about this music conjured from electronic ingenuity and industrial noise. BBC TV's Tomorrow's World paid a visit in 1975.
Kraftwerk have a name for this. It's machine music. The sounds are created at their laboratory in Dusseldorf, programmed, then recreated on stage with the minimum of fuss.
Stars like David Bowie began to pay homage to Kraftwerk's influence, and in the United States, the music's popularity spread rapidly. Arthur Baker, who became a leading music producer, remembers hearing it for the first time in a Boston music store.
The album came in and it was like 23 minutes and we threw it on. And I remember the first thing thinking was it sounded like the Beach Boys because of the fact that fun, 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 the Autobahn. I thought it was like fun, fun, fun. It was crazy music. I mean, Autobahn was very, very different, and it was actually a pop radio hit in America.
When Baker produced one of the seminal early hip-hop tracks, Afrika Bambaata's Planet Rock, Kraftwerk's music was included.
In the discos and the clubs in New York, you would hear Trans-Europe Express. The beat and the melody, it all was great, and you would hear that played. Guys would breakdance to it in the late 70s, early 80s. These guys like Bambaataa and Flash and Cool DJ Herc were very open to beats. So basically it didn't really matter where the beat came from. It was the beat funky, and those German guys were funky. Kraftwerk in itself was a very funky group.
And there were admirers among many of the top US musical innovators. Carl Craig, one of the pioneers of Detroit techno music.
It just sounded like music of the future. I mean, I was a kid when I first heard Computer World. I think I was about 12 then, and I'd never heard anything like that, especially with Pocket Calculator, which was a bit of a novelty song, but it really struck a chord with me about how music should sound in the future. Coming from Detroit, it's a lot of soul music and a lot of R&B and stuff like that. And also after disco, it wasn't a warm sound, it was a very clinical kind of clean sound to it, but it was very precise.
And were you surprised when you discovered where the music came from a town in Germany?
It was actually when I got Pocket Calculator, there was a little single with the plastic cover and their faces on the front. I thought they were Japanese because of the Japanese writing on it.
Back in Britain, Kraftwerk's breakthrough in the charts came in the early 1980s with The Model.
She's a model and she's looking good.
Kraftwerk were entering a much broader musical world. Successful singles, the traditional 3 minutes or so, were quite a change from their lengthy album tracks, harking back to the young Hütter's 10-minute keyboard improvisations. Kraftwerk's was hardly your average pop music, but the possibility of international stardom posed new challenges for Hütter and his colleagues. Guitarist Michael Rother had played with Kraftwerk in its early years.
When I was a member of the band, it was quite different music from what became famous worldwide a few years later when they started to reduce it, to take it away from this rough and fast-forward, dirty kind of music which we did, which was exciting, but probably would have always only appealed to a minority. They moved forward to being something I would call a pop band, to become computer models, something like that. This deserves, of course, a lot of respect. I guess it has to do with their personalities, so maybe they have come very close to expressing their personalities in that music.
As well as the music, there was a carefully cultivated image which turned Kraftwerk concerts into sci-fi spectacles. Hütter, the architecture graduate, spoke of influences including Bauhaus and expressionist filmmakers like Fritz Lang. The effect of new technology on the relationship of man to machine was an obsession.
I'm the operator with my pocket calculator.
Instead of rock star denim, Kraftwerk performed in suits and ties, engineers as much as artists. Hütter played on tour with the cliché of obsessive Germanic punctuality. Billed to start performing once in London at 8 p.m, Kraftwerk appeared on stage a few minutes before and began the second the clock reached 8. Music journalist Simon Witter, who's met Hütter several times, suggests punctuality was part of his fierce resistance to the idea of pop celebrity.
It's really quite extraordinary. I mean, it's one of the few compromises they still make, is that he talks to anyone at all, because Florian Schneider, who's no longer with the group, gave up 25 years ago talking to the media, and they don't view themselves as stars at all. They fail completely to understand why people are interested in them on a personal level. The fascination with what they get up to in their private lives and stuff, they don't see that as being in any way relevant or interesting. They see themselves very much as workers in the sound factory who sort of go to work every day and do a job, and they just don't get that people think they're stars. They certainly don't think of themselves in that way.
Kraftwerk's financial success enabled Hütter and his colleagues to retreat for long periods into the anonymity of their Kling-Klang studio in Düsseldorf, rumoured to have no telephone or other connection with the outside world. Unlike rock hellraisers, they'd refresh themselves with vegetarian food and long cycle rides. Cycling is Hütter's passion, brought into Kraftwerk's music through the Tour de France album. And it's on a bike, suggests local journalist Philipp Holstein, that Düsseldorfers are most likely to glimpse their mysterious superstar.
People say Kraftwerk members always stuck together. They were riding their bicycle, it was like a family. They were watching the Tour de France together on television and things like that.
But the idea of Hütter's Kraftwerk as one big happy family is deceptive. After the departure of co-founder Florian Schneider, Hütter's now the last surviving original member. And in a band which has no manager, his control is substantial. Early band member Michael Rother and Philipp Holstein.
Well, how could I express that in a polite way? I guess Ralf Hütter and Florian Schneider had a very strange attitude towards members of the band. I think they had the idea that it was a sort of corporation and they were the bosses and they had employees.
Ralf Hütter hires the musicians that were only engineers in the concept, and he fires them when they do not fit the concept no longer.
So is Hütter quite a controlling presence in the group?
I think so. He's the chief controller, the master of the concept.
In the end, Hütter seems to imply the band members are less relevant than the music. The band's even experimented with robot substitutes. Hütter once sent a robot to give a BBC TV interview on his behalf. Robots are good, after all, at avoiding intrusive questions. Very little is known reliably about Hütter's private life. That's how he likes it, says Simon Witter, away from the stage, back in his secretive Düsseldorf studio, endlessly working away.
Electronic gardener, he called himself once. So, just sort of pruning the roses, perfecting plants, working on what there is already, but striving for a perfection that you'll never achieve.
As for the new album signalled this week, Hütter & Co., perfectionist tinkerers with their product, like all good Düsseldorf manufacturers, may keep their fans waiting a while. Hütter himself never likes to hurry.
New ideas need to be worked out, and the music composes itself, and when it's finished, we know.
But when their new album does emerge, there'll be eager listeners around the world. And Ralf Hütter will preside over it all with customary robotic efficiency, composing the soundtrack to one of the most surprising success stories of post-war German culture.
Profile was presented by Chris Bowlby and produced by John Murphy.